Some people call it a flick, some people call it a sidearm. I'm partial to calling it a forehand myself, and it's the topic of this week's video. How's it going, guys? I'm Danny, and this week the topic of my video is forehand. Real quick, I was on Disc Golf Nerd's Plastic Podcast this week. The link is in the description if you want to check that out. So the last time I tried a forehand video, it didn't really go so well. That's because I'm not an expert at forehand. So I brought in an expert this time, none other than Putter Pants himself. Eric Oakley has reviewed my script, and he sent me footage of him throwing, and he gave me some tips in person on how to throw a forehand. So I'm pretty confident in my information this time. Let's start with grip. Now, the grip in a forehand is one of the more varied things throughout the throw. No people really like to grip the disc the exact same way, but there are some things that should be consistent. For starters, you want to put 2 fingers against the inside rim of the disc. Now, the tendency is to turn your fingers sideways so the pads of your fingers are up against the flight plate, but that's not going to be as powerful because it uses this motion to throw. If you can turn your fingers slightly so they're pointed more at the rim, that's going to add a lot of power. It's important to set the disc deep in between your pointer finger and your thumb. You want to get it as far as you can to maximize the surface area that you're touching. The more of the disc you're holding onto, the more power and the more control you're going to have. Now, there are some variations on this grip. Some people like to use the tips of their fingers rather than the pads. And this works fine for some people, but what some people like to do is to spread their fingers out so they're not both up against the rim. Now, this might be okay for like a touch shot, for like an approach shot, but if you're trying to throw anything with power, it's important to have your fingers either stacked or both of them powering the shot. If your fingers aren't moving along the same plane, you're going to get a wobble on your shot and it's not going to be very consistent. So to grip the disc, put it way down in between your thumb and your pointer finger. Put your middle finger and your pointer finger sideways against the rim and get your thumb as far on top as you can so you're holding onto a whole bunch of the disc. Moving on to footwork. Now, there's generally 2 types of footwork for the forehand throw. I know I like to take more of a walking step with my right foot and then I follow through onto my left foot as I'm throwing. But some people will take a skip step with their right foot and then throw onto their left foot. It doesn't really matter as long as you've established your footwork and you know what you're doing so you can make it consistent. Now, in the backhand, your footwork is really important, what direction your feet are facing. In the forehand, it's not so much. You generally don't want to be just straight up on your target. You want to be angled a little bit to the right, but other than that, it's not super important what direction your feet are pointing. You want to land on your non-dominant foot. So for me, that's my left foot, but if you're left-handed, you would want to land on your right foot. And you want to make sure you're slamming that foot into the ground. That's going to drive your weight forward and use that to power the shot. Next step is the reach back. Now, a reach back in a forehand throw is just as important as the reach back in a backhand throw. You want your reach back to be straight, exactly opposite the direction you're throwing, so the disc can move straight forward without having to curve around your body at all. Now, one of the other purposes of a reach back in a forehand throw is to load your wrist. Now, loading your wrist means bending it back and getting the disc set back here. That's going to help a lot for a consistent release. I know some people like to load their wrist halfway through their shot, and that's really just cutting your shot in half, and it's not going to do you any favors. So it's important to set the disc back more over your forearm as you're reaching back so you can have range of motion out of your wrist to power the shot forward. Now, as for the pull, I hear everybody say lead with the elbow when you throw a forehand. Now, when they say lead with the elbow, I think of it more as leading with your wrist. Because if you lead with your elbow and you get your elbow way out front, you're going to end up torquing on it weird. And I actually had tennis elbow for a number of months a while ago, and I couldn't throw forehands. I could only throw backhands. So you don't want to crank your elbow so bad that you're hurting yourself. I like to think of leading with your wrist, as that's going to get sort of the same effect without the emphasis on torquing your elbow. For the throw, I like to keep my elbow tucked into my side, and I don't want to have the disc come too high or too below that. I want to keep the disc generally around the same height because that's going to be in line with everything else that's powering the shot. It's going to be more powerful. Now, the release and follow through for a forehand is one of the biggest areas that I see people make a mistake. A lot of people come from a baseball background, and when they throw, they tend to roll their wrist over. Now, what that does is it takes your thumb and it puts torque that's not around the axis that the disc was already spinning. So that gives the disc the wobble that you see a lot of people throw with. So it's important to keep your wrist from rolling over and just flex it in the same line as the shot. Lots of people like to say with your palm up, but that's if your fingers are sideways. I like to think of my thumb up. If I keep my thumb up as I'm releasing, my hand isn't going to flip over like this because my thumb would then be pointing down. Anyway, other important notes, you want to make sure you're following through forward at your target. You don't want to follow through across your body or around in a circle. And also, you want to commit your weight to your follow through. I talked about this earlier, but you should end up bent at the waist, leaning over your front foot. That means you've committed yourself to following through and getting your weight into the shot, and that's going to add a lot of power. So that's all I've got for this week, guys. I don't have my microphone, so if the audio sounds a little bit off, that's why. Thanks to Eric Oakley for throwing the disc and getting a video of it and explaining to me, looking over my script, everything. Thanks to Anthony over Dynamic Disc for getting an awesome shot of him throwing. Be sure you message my Facebook page if you have any questions or you want a form critique. And other than that, check out some Dynamic Discs, and remember, slow is smooth and smooth is far.